Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Don't Be Ridiculous podcast. It is Monday, about 4 p.m. Eastern time. We got Clark. We're all into the off season now. Off season NBA stuff heating up even faster than normal. Got a big trade to talk about. And yeah, these are honestly these are some of my favorite shows. We just get to pontificate on topics and just kind of have some just kind of have fun with
Yep.
it. Don't necessarily have any games to react to. Oh, and happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. Hope everybody gave their love to the dads out there. They definitely need it. Um, but the Washington Wizards have traded Bradley Beal to the Phoenix Suns for Chris Paul, Landry Shamet, some second round picks, and I guess a pick swap or something. So yeah, so we're gonna dive in and examine this from every angle. So I mean, look, my first of all, I'm surprised Bradley Beal got traded so fast.
Yeah.
I thought that it would take a little bit of time, but then when you see what Phoenix actually gave up for him, it's kind of like, wow, they really, Washington basically dumped Bradley Beal, just gave him away for nothing, basically. Because if you look at it, I mean, Washington traded for Chris Paul. They're either going to buy him out or trade him somewhere else. Landry Shamit's that I think the last 2 years of his contract aren't guaranteed, so he's going to end up out of there. So this is Washington just clearing everything out, and everybody would say, well, why didn't they do this last year? Well, because they changed general managers.
Yeah.
So last year the guy, Tommy Shepard was still trying to win. Now they have, I think Michael Winger, I guess is the guy's name from the Clippers, and they decided, all right, we're just going to blow this whole thing up. I mean, first off, like I think it's I've gone back and forth, but I think if I'm Phoenix, I think I would do this trade. I think it's for them. I think you've got to. I understand them saying, "All right, we got to make this. We got to make this move." But I think there's a couple things. There's a lot of things that go into it. Number one, roster construction. Like how are we building teams nowadays? And so yeah, let's start with that. So first of all, the idea that we're going back to building super teams as if these three guys are a super team. Number one, and I think that number one, I think that gives them too much credit. Like I don't think the only super team that really, like if we're gonna be real about it, the only one that really worked was the Heat with LeBron. I mean, Boston worked, they won the championship, but then the guys kind of got old pretty quickly because those guys were already, kind of at the end of their prime. It worked with the Heat because for a couple of reasons, LeBron and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh were all in their prime. They were all really good defensive players, right? And they were adding on to a culture that already was winning. Durant going to the Golden State Warriors, that's just adding on to a team that's already championship level. That's not, we're going to go all in, sign these guys as free agents. We're just going to create this team out of thin air and it's going to win. And so I think that's an issue. And second of all, like you just look at this from a basketball sense, and I'm not going to get into, well, their bench, they need more depth. Okay, yeah, sure, but that's not the major issue. The major issue to me is like who's going to play defense. DeAndre Ayton was so bad in the playoffs they had to take him out and just play the backups because he was so bad. So what are you doing with that position? It's like you've got three guys you can count on right now. Everybody's talking about, well, they have these four guys. DeAndre Ayton, I mean, we'll see, but he wasn't even a starter in the playoffs last year. He was so bad. So, yeah, I think there's some holes now. Can Phoenix kind of fill in some of those? Yeah, they can a little bit, but it's going to be pretty hard. It's going to be all minimum guys, the rest of the roster. So, yeah, I think this makes Phoenix better. I think Phoenix has they're definitely a contender, but I don't think this puts them in the driver's seat of anything. I still think Denver's the best team, and I don't even think it's a question.
Yeah. So, yeah, I was watching a clip from Get Up this morning on ESPN, and what's his name? Alan Hahn made a point DeAndre Ayton was kind of like he was wanting the ball before, right? And now you got three dudes who they need to score. So now he's not going to get the. And I mean, as you were saying, that he was kind of played off the floor last year. Last year. This is like we're talking about a month and a half ago or something. Anyway,
Right.
against Denver. So and also Woj was saying that the trade market for Ayton is, I think the word he used was lukewarm.
Right.
So I understand if people are going, oh, what if you move Ayton and you get some pieces? Like, that's a nice idea, and I actually think that's a good idea, but I don't know that that's possible. And then Colin Cowherd's like, well, you just, fine, just trade Ayton and then get 2 6'8" guys who can play defense. And I'm like, oh yeah, because they're just available. They just grow on trees. It's like getting big guys. It's just just go get a big. Yeah, it's fine. It's right there. Just grab it. Yeah, it's that easy. So yeah, I don't know. Like the Kevin Durant thing, I was okay with them doing that, and then I was like, they're not going to win this year. Maybe they can add stuff in the offseason. Maybe that'll make it better. I don't know that this is the way to get there. Maybe there wasn't any other way to really dramatically improve their team, just because of all they gave up to get Kevin Durant. So maybe from that standpoint, you're kind of boxed in, and it's like, well, if we're boxed in, we may as well just go all in, put all the chips in the middle of the table. So from that perspective, I kind of get it. But if you're asking me if I think they're the favorite or they're going to win the championship, no, I don't. Like I literally, I'm going to plant my flag on this hill. I will die on this hill. Like they're not winning the championship. I literally. Now, if we come back in 2 years and they've won the championship, then I'll look like an idiot, which is fine. I'm totally cool with that. But I'm planting my flag right now. This is not going to win a championship. From a certain perspective, like I said, as I was saying, I sort of get why Phoenix would do it. But you got three guys who, they shoot mid-range shots. I mean, I guess I've been hearing Bradley Beal, he's a decent catch-and-shoot player. He hasn't really been able to do that because he's been kind of the focal point of the team the last few years. So I guess that kind of helps a little bit. And he probably has the tools to be a decent defender. You do have a defensive head coach now, Frank Vogel. So, and Durant can be a good defender. Booker's got the tools to be a decent defender, but I'm just like, okay, fine. Maybe you can defend some guys on the perimeter, but at the same time, it's like, if you're having to expend a lot of energy on the defensive end, you can't have as much on the offensive end, And then I forget who else was saying, I don't know if it was Bucher or somebody else, that when you have three guys who kind of do the same thing, it's like the law of diminishing returns, right? When you had Dwayne Wade and LeBron, like they sort of did the same stuff. They figured out ways to make it work, but Chris Bosh was the odd man out.
Right.
Okay, so I think the mistake I think people are making is they're looking at it like, well, you just this guy's going to get 20, this guy's going to get 20, and this guy's going to get 20, and in a perfect world, yeah, it would work that way. And there may be some games in the regular season where that happens, and in those games they're going to be impossible to beat. When they're scoring like that on offense. But I don't think that's really going to be the norm. They're not really going to have much of a bench to speak of, and it's not so much that you need this like elite bench unit to come in. You need things to be solid when they come in. You need it to not be like the bench comes in and then we're minus, the plus minus thing. We're minus whatever when the bench comes in. So then you end up having to play your starters more often, and then they wear out, which is what we saw happen with Phoenix. This, in the playoffs that just happened.
Yeah, I kind of I'm back and forth on Bradley Beal. I think that he's being presented to us like he's a superstar.
Right.
And I think he's a good player, but he hasn't. And I sent this to you last night. This is the number of games that Bradley Beal's the last 4 seasons. Okay, in the regular season, these are the number of games that he's played: 50, 40, 60, and 57. So. And Booker had had injuries the last 2 years. So there's no, first of all, these guys are not going to play, they're not going to play all the games. Like that's the way that's gone. Like if this continues, like there's going to be a struggle there. And so I think we need to, I think we just need to temper our expectations a little bit. I don't think Bradley Beal is a superstar. If he's your third best player, is that really good for you? Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Like, it doesn't mean they're a bad team. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be as simple as just trade DeAndre Ayton and you'll be fine. Because if you trade DeAndre Ayton, okay, who's your big guy now? Who's protecting the rim? And so it's it's hard because I just don't feel like they have a complete team, and it's going to be hard to fill out the rest of it. We'll see what happens, but yeah, listen, do they have a chance? Of course they have a chance. You always have a chance when you have players that are that good. Because anything could happen in the NBA. We thought the Celtics were awesome, and we'll talk about the Celtics more in a few minutes, but they lost in the conference finals to a team that they probably should have beaten. So you don't know how this stuff is going to go, but yeah, I'm not high on it. I don't think this gets them to Denver's level, and I think that anybody who's acting like, oh, this makes them the favorite it's just blatant disrespect towards Denver. You're not valuing, and I heard this on Colin Cowherd show. Well, Denver had the 18th best defense and they won the championship. First of all, don't bring me regular season statistics to try to prove your argument. Okay, the Celtics were supposed to be unbelievable on defense. We saw what happened in the playoffs. They sucked. So I'm really not interested in your regular season statistics to prove how good you are. Like we saw in the playoffs, Denver can play real defense. Yeah. We saw last year, Phoenix really doesn't. So, and by the way, that's not all Phoenix's fault. When you're playing Jokic and Murray, you're going to get scored on, unless you're really good. So,
Colin was also saying, well, Phoenix made Denver sweat. No. Devin Booker was on, I've said this a million times now. Devin Booker was literally on fire. Okay. It's like right. NBA Jam. He's on fire. I mean, it was ridiculous, and credit to him. But in like those two games that they lost in Phoenix, which by the way, was on the road. I'm trying to remember exactly. I think Game 3, like Phoenix was ahead a lot of the game, and Denver kind of came back. They couldn't close it further, because Phoenix kept making shots. And then in Game 4, I believe, Jokic had like 53 points. Okay, like they scored like 120 points and they lost because Devin Booker was on fire. Okay,
yeah.
So I don't want to hear that they made them sweat. I don't really think that's the case. And also, forget that. Denver's now won the championship. Okay? Unless they come into... And by the way, this could happen. Unless they come into next season and they're just kind of like going through the motions and they're kind of... like Pat Riley talks about that. What is it? Like the disease of me or something like that, where people get... Unless something like that happens, which is plausible because it happens all the time, I don't see why I'm supposed to like think, well, you made them sweat that one time. Yeah, but they just won the championship. And we look at, they're going to have basically the same team. I mean, Bruce Brown, they're going to have to replace him. But so now I'm supposed to believe this other team's just going to come right in. And by the way, people are like, oh, well, Phoenix has the whole season to work this out. Well, yeah, technically they do, but Kevin Durant's going to miss games. Like, right. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when and how many. Booker's had some injury issues. Bradley Beal's had some injury issues. And like I was just saying, they're not going to be a deep team. So, like, how are they going to look when those guys are out for, 10, 15 games? Like, that's right. It's a huge, I mean, I got to be honest, Matt Ishbia, like, he's either a nutcase or he's just, I don't know. He just likes taking risks. I don't know. He's the owner of the Suns. Because, I mean, he's literally been there about 5 minutes, and he's made, like, two of the most gigantic trades we've seen in a while.
Yeah, and the Bradley, like we said, the Bradley Beal trade, I don't have a problem with doing it because what did you give up? Like, nothing. Like, now, granted, they didn't have a whole lot to give up.
Well, yeah.
Because it was already gone. But they weren't going to keep Chris Paul, and they didn't want to keep him at that salary. And to turn two guys that you don't really want into Bradley Beal that's a hell of a win. And you talking about Denver, I think it's more likely it's going to be like the 2015 Warriors after they won the title, and everybody's like, yeah, you only won because those guys got injured. And Golden State came back the next year and just destroyed everybody. I think there's a better chance Denver comes back like that. It's like, oh, we're not legit. You don't think we're, it's not good enough. You beat an 8 seed. It doesn't count. That's what you're going to say. Okay. I think it's much more likely to be like that. So yeah, I'm in on the Bradley Beal trade. I'm not necessarily in on the Phoenix Suns as a juggernaut or they're gonna win the championship. Now they have more work to do. Could they get some veteran minimum guys? They're like, oh, I want to go get a ring. I'll take less. Is that going to happen? Maybe. We just haven't seen that in a while. Like that hasn't really been happening the last 4 or 5 years. So I just wonder if that still exists or not.
Well,
so
also,
we'll see.
Why wouldn't you just go to Denver?
I agree.
I mean, because Denver, if you look at Denver, if you get open and you run the floor, Jokic will pass you the ball. Yep. So, with Phoenix, I just wonder, there's only one ball, and I kind of wonder if that's going to end up being a problem. And again, another thing, maybe this is overblown to an extent, but who's the leader on Phoenix?
Right.
It's not DeAndre Ayton. It's not Kevin Durant. It's not Devin. Oh, and by the way, another point I wanted to bring up, because you had said something before. I should have brought this up earlier, but you were talking about Bradley Beal. He's not a superstar. Okay, so when Chris Bosh came to the Heat, he was like the centerpiece of the Toronto Raptors, and they made the playoffs. Okay,
right.
Bradley Beal can't even make the playoffs as the centerpiece of a team. So as the third best guy on a team, I think that's probably about right. But I mean, damn. I mean, yeah. So I think people are overreacting a little bit. This is not Kevin Durant from 5 years ago, tearing his Achilles tendon. So that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Kevin Durant, Bill Simmons brought this up on his podcast. Kevin Durant looks the same as he did 10 years ago. So everybody thinks he's still, a young guy. And
no, he's what is he, 34?
He's 35, yeah. So he's not young. So it's we think we're getting this Kevin Durant from 2017 still, and that guy's gone. Yeah. So this is not a super team where it's these guys are Devin Booker in the prime of his career rolling along, totally on board with that. And I think Bradley Beal is going to show people some stuff, but this is not the level of where these guys are so good that they can just overcome, lacking the rest of the stuff on their roster. They're not good enough to do that. That would be my criticism of this team. And you brought up, not only who's the leader, Clark, who's running the team, who's running the offense, who's making sure that they get into the right stuff. These guys are give me the ball, let me shoot. You know, and everybody brings up, well, Kevin Durant worked in Golden State where they moved the ball. Yeah, that's because they had a system in place where they already established what they were going to do, and he just had to fit into it. It's a little more difficult when you're completely starting from scratch. New coach, new owner, right? A whole bunch of new players. So I don't think
in Brooklyn they didn't really have a system, and you saw how that looked. So I'm just,
Right. And the thing is, this team, they're going to be good on offense. They're not going to be as good as Brooklyn was on offense. They're not going to be that kind of dynamic. You know what I mean? It's not because Brooklyn at least had Harden who was setting guys up.
Right.
This team, you've got, and I'm not saying you have to be the best defensive team in the league. I'm not saying that. But you got to have, and I said this to you yesterday, you got to have somebody on your team that's a really good defender. You got to have one guy. And who's that going to be? So, but there's a lot to be determined with that. So let's look at the other parts of this. So Chris Paul, it doesn't look like to me that he's going to be staying in Washington. I doubt he may not even play a game there. They're trying to see if somebody will give up something for him, but I don't think anybody's going to, because if you do, you're going to have to guarantee his salary for $30 million next year. And I don't think anybody wants to take that on. So I think what's going to end up happening is Chris Paul is going to get bought out, and then he'll get to go where he wants to go. And obviously the LA teams are first on the list because he has, his family lives in LA. So he'd like to be close to home. I don't think, like we've talked about this before, I don't think Chris Paul is a difference maker at this point, but I think he could
No,
help it. He could definitely help a team.
like he could help the
Um,
Clippers.
yep.
Now again, I don't think they're winning the championship, but I mean he could help them. That's kind of an improvement. I mean, a lot of that comes down to, again, it's all going to come down to health because Chris Paul's a guy that gets hurt all the time. Kawhi Leonard is obviously battling chronic knee issues and other stuff. Paul George doesn't really stay healthy, so yeah, it's uh, you know, I mean, to me, that's kind of interesting, but I mean, it's not, I don't really think it makes that much of a difference.
Yeah. It's funny. Chris Paul was on Good Morning America this
Yeah,
morning.
right. I saw that. That was hilarious.
So he's got
Yeah,
to
I just
explain.
found out on the way in
Yeah,
here.
yeah, he's promoting a book and he's got to explain what he thinks of the trade, and it's kind of like you can see he's kind of on the spot or whatever. So man, that's messed up. And I think he's going on First Take tomorrow. So so this will be
So wait a minute,
this.
they had scheduled that beforehand?
Yeah, right. Because he wrote a book and he's promoting it. That's what he's doing. So now I can't imagine he's going to say very much because there's probably not a whole lot to say. But it's pretty interesting. That's how life goes in the NBA. You go on a plane to fly to New York and you end up traded. Um, so yeah, listen. Like I said, my overall thoughts. Look, I think I think it's a. I understand what they're doing. I get it, but I don't think this puts them as the best team in the league or a serious championship contender. But there's a lot of stuff going on in the Western Conference, and we'll see how it goes. But this I brought up to you the other day from last week that I wanted to talk about after the finals. You and I discussed this, and you said, listen, look, here come the arguments. Like Denver, they only beat an 8 seed. How good are they really? They didn't beat the Celtics or the Bucks. So, how are we, what do we think of it? Is this an all-time great team? Well, I don't know if it's an all-time great team, and so it was going to come the downgrading of Phoenix and or Dallas. I'm saying Denver, excuse me. Let me get the right team here. That Denver's not that great and blah blah blah. All this stuff is gonna come out, and you were totally right. That's kind of you started hearing that, and some of these shows, some of the media, you started hearing.
You started hearing a little before the end of the finals, right? And so that's why I was like, oh, I've seen this play before. Here we go. And so I basically figured that's what was probably going to happen. I mean, I thought that people were going to be all over the trade, the Bradley Beal trade, and a bunch of people were going to be like, this is awesome, this is great, they're going to win the championship. And there were some people, but a lot more people were more critical, which I got to give them credit for. But on this particular one, I'd seen this before, and so I was like, yeah, that's probably what's going to happen, because people have been down on Denver for, the whole year. So it didn't really surprise me that that would kind of continue. They'd find some way. And I mean, again, I said this last week, like, oh, well, they didn't have to play Milwaukee. Milwaukee lost. Okay? They fired their coach because they had coaching issues, which we knew they had coaching issues when they won the championship. Okay? They got issues with Giannis. You can't really give him the ball at the end of games because he's not good at shooting free throws. He didn't even want the ball at the end of game 5 against the Heat. So to say like, oh, well, they didn't have to play them, would that have, are there some things about that might have been a more interesting matchup than the Heat? Yeah, maybe. But why am I supposed to believe like, oh, well, Milwaukee could have won that? Chris Middleton's not the same. So like, why, and Boston got down 3-0 to Miami. Okay, and you saw the way that the way the Boston played they lost that series in the first 2 games. The way they played at the end of those first 2 games was atrocious. And then they go back to Miami and they get annihilated in game 3 to go down 3-0. So, like, oh, they didn't have to play Boston. Who gives a shit? Boston obviously had a lot of problems. So, I mean, Boston was screwing around with Philadelphia. They were screwing around with Atlanta. So why am I supposed to be like, oh, Denver didn't have to play them, so that doesn't really prove... Denver rolled through everybody. So if you think all these teams are not as good as, what Boston or Milwaukee would have been, fine. But Denver rolled through everybody in the playoffs. Okay? So, if you're saying it was too easy, well, yeah, I guess it was easy, and they rolled through everything like they were supposed to. So, Do they get any credit for that or what?
Yeah, it was as I've said ad nauseum, it was obvious to me at the beginning of the conference finals that the Lakers or the Nuggets were going to win the title. Like I don't think it was I wasn't even I don't even think it's that questionable of a theory. Like that's where I was. I was like, I'm watching the teams. I've watched the whole playoffs. I'm like, the Lakers and the Nuggets are going to beat the Celtics. I was thinking that at the beginning of the series that the Celtics would figure out how to beat the Heat just because, the Heat had the injuries and, I felt like, Boston would figure it out. And they just completely shit the bed in the series. And I know everybody's going to be like, well, they came back and they got it to game 7. I mean, they needed a miracle play in game 6 tip in to get to game 7, and then they got smoked in game 7 on their home floor. So I think it's absolutely ridiculous. Denver is legit. Now look, is Denver I think Denver's the best team since the 2017 Warriors. I think that if you look at the other teams now, I think that the 2018 Warriors probably would have beaten Denver, probably, but it would have been tough. But that was Golden State was kind of, they could get there, but they weren't always there. And I think that 2019 Toronto team, we don't give them any credit because, Durant got injured. And so we just go, oh, well, the injuries, whatever. That Toronto team was really good. They had 5 guys who could get their own shot. And, it was a pretty awesome run there, but this Denver team is legit. Like just going against the teams that, I think that Toronto team would give them a hard time, but I think Denver overall would have figured out a way to beat them. The Lakers team from the bubble, I think this Denver team beats that Laker team. I think the Milwaukee team, I mean, we've talked about this before. Milwaukee was down 2-0 twice in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Managed to pull it off. They were getting smoked by Brooklyn until Brooklyn got, a bunch of guys get injured. And they were down 2-0 in the finals, and it looked like it came down to a couple of plays or Phoenix wins the title that year. So I think this Denver team is legit. Now, they're not the 2017 Warriors, okay? They're not going to just smoke everybody. That's not how this is going to go. But we have to be honest about what happened in the playoffs. Like, they were killing people, And like you said about Phoenix, okay, they lost those 2 games on the road when Devin Booker's shooting 75%.
Yeah.
I mean, so yeah, I don't I think this is quite obvious. People are missing this. I don't understand why I need to sell you that Denver's really good. Didn't you just watch the playoffs? And they didn't play the Celtics, they didn't play the Bucks. Guys, we need to just acknowledge this. And I've been a skeptic on the Celtics from the beginning. Like they're in the finals against the Warriors, and I'm going, I still don't see it. I don't believe in it. The Boston Celtics are a fraud. Okay? They're a fraudulent team. This is not a legit team that's just going to win multiple championships. They've had years and years to figure it out. They still can't do it. Teams come in and punk them because they're tougher, they're more physical, they play better defense. So the Celtics haven't proven anything to me, and I don't think that team, I think Denver would have annihilated them too. Like, so let me get this straight. You're going to be undisciplined, right? You're not going to play defense all the time, right? You're going to shoot too many threes, and you think you're going to beat the Denver Nuggets? Like, what are you talking about? Like, it's just crazy. So, yeah. I think the level of just how quickly we forget on this stuff it's absolutely ridiculous. And I don't think, and anybody trying to sell me that, oh, well, Phoenix could beat them now. It's literally, it's another sexy team that people want to fall in love with or want to make me believe in that I can clearly see doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and, we don't have to go too far into Denver, but I mean, basically, like, they've got their main guys locked up for the next, 3 years or something. Yep. So it's really, and Chris Mannix made this point, it's really a question of, for instance, they may lose Bruce Brown. They need to replace guys like that, which is possible, I think the way that they've constructed their roster, given how the CBA is going to change in a couple of years, they're in a really good spot, So they're in a good spot to contend and not get screwed by the way the rules are changing. So to my mind, it's kind of like I think they can make the conference finals for the next like 3 years. You know,
Yep.
and I kind of think, barring injury, if this group doesn't win another championship in the next 2 or 3 years, I think that's maybe failure is not the right word, but that's kind of a little underachievement. Again, barring injury, if someone gets hurt or something like that, I think that they have a really good shot to win another title. Now, could they win two more? I mean, that's again, when you talk about winning multiple titles, so many things have to go your way in addition to your roster being really good. So I don't know about that, but I do think they have a really good shot to win another title. So is it a dynasty? I don't know. I mean, probably not. But who cares? Like, they're going to be really good.
Right.
And I think they're still going to, and even when, after the next few years are up, when the contracts are up, they'll have to figure out, some stuff. But Jokic is going to be, I think Jokic is going to be really good for a while. So, we'll see. I mean, I was, it was funny. I was watching, I was on YouTube. I was like, let me see what Jason Whitlock thinks about the Denver Nuggets, and he kind of, I don't know, he brought somebody on and he's like, yeah, I don't know how well Jokic's body's going to hold up and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, he's never been a guy that's gotten hurt. So I don't know why I'm supposed to think that he's, if you have questions about Jamal Murray or something, I'm like, okay. But, I don't know that necessarily injuries are going to be a big issue. I think injuries are obviously a bigger concern for like Phoenix or the Lakers or the Clippers. Like I think that's a bigger issue.
Yeah, I think well, everyone's telling us, Jokic is in the best shape he's ever been in. So I don't know that, and his game is not based on athleticism or herky jerky movements, or he's not really out there like, exerting himself to the level that you wouldn't think, he's not going to have some crazy injury because he's flying all over the place. That's not how he plays. His game is pretty much adapts to whatever you're doing, and it works in pretty much in any situation. So I don't think that is the issue. But what else?
So let me real quick. So I did bring up Whitlock. So let's talk about this for a little bit because I watched his reaction the day after the Nuggets had won the championship. Okay.
Right.
And maybe one thing maybe we can talk about, but basically him and then another guest he had on, they're talking about it and they're saying, yeah, Jokic is, he's really good, but I don't think, he's, if American-born players knew what the hell they were doing, then I don't think he'd be this good. And also, I don't think he would have been this good in the 90s, And I'm just like, guys, like, just can we stop with the 90s basketball as just the epitome of, like, come on. Seriously? Jokic wouldn't work in the 90s? Did you watch Hakeem Olajuwon? Like,
Right.
what, I love this idea. It's like, well, in the 90s, people would put their elbows into you. People don't do that now? What, I don't understand. Like, there's no post defense at all? Like, what are you talking about?
Right.
So, yeah, I thought that was pretty ridiculous. And then I thought it was like, well, if American-born players knew what they were doing, he's only dominating because, Americans are idiots. And it's like, no, that's not really true. Like, he's dominating because he's incredibly good. Okay?
Right.
He's got so many moves and he's such a great passer. He's got such great vision. Like, guys, just it's okay. He's really good. Just say he's really, that's it. Where does he rank all time? I don't know. I don't give a shit. He's really good right now, okay? And then I guess the other thing that they were talking about was is it good for the league that, it seems like the best players now are foreign-born players. So I did think that's it. So what do you think about that?
I think that, these things are based on connection, and there's just going to be less connection with a guy who's not American. So
Yeah.
it does, it does create a bit of a disconnect, when you're trying to get people to, but I think that has more to do with the way that Jokic plays and what his general, attitude and how he interacts with people. And he's pretty quiet, laid back, doesn't really want to engage in all the stuff outside of basketball. So look, I think yeah, it's challenging when you're basically the best player in the league is not American. There's a little bit of a challenge to it. I think like I said, I think it has more to do with Jokic's personality than anything else. I think Giannis is a little more accessible as a foreign player. But look, here's the thing: we have plenty of great American players in the league. Like, look at the Phoenix Suns, who just got Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, and Devin Booker.
Right.
Jason Tatum, made first team All NBA. So
LeBron
we have
and
plenty
Anthony
of
Davis,
right. We have plenty of Steph Curry. We have plenty of great American
Butler. Yeah.
players. But there is a like who's going to carry the torch forward as we go. It is an interesting discussion. Now, do I think it's a problem for the league? It's not a problem for the league. It's fine. Their next TV deal is going to be way more than the last one was, right? The caps keeps going up every year. So, like the NBA, yeah, is it a bit of would they like it to be better? Would they like the TV? And the TV ratings were this year were a little bit less than last year, not by much. It's like 800,000 people. It's not a big deal. So, yeah, I don't think it in the long term, I don't think it matters that much. Now, as the face of the league, would I like Denver to handle it a little bit differently than like the Spurs did, where the Spurs acted like everybody was an annoyance and Greg Popovich is giving everybody a hard time who asks him a question? Yeah, I would appreciate it if they did a little bit better than that. But do I think in the grand scheme of things it really matters that much? Probably not. But it does. It is an interesting discussion. It does say something about what are we doing in the United States to where we bring up our players that versus what happens in Europe, because a lot of these guys, especially the best guys, they come from Europe and they seem to be ready to play. They seem to act like adults. They seem to have their act together, and we've got we've got some American players that are in some trouble right now. Most of them are young and immature, and so I wonder what that says. Does this what does that say about the American system of how we create our athletes? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, when we were watching college basketball, it's like there's stuff we're watching going, why can't you guys throw the ball into the post? How come you guys are missing so many layups? Like there is, and I don't know exactly what that is. I don't know what the deal is, because it's like it's not that way. I mean, granted, I guess players aren't playing as long in college, but there's still a lot of players that end up in the league that went to college for like 3-4 years.
Yep.
I mean, I know in college football, obviously they have to be there for 3 years. So there's in college football, you can come to the NFL and you can be ready to go right away. You can make an impact immediately. So I know there's some of that, but then I just wonder if is it how the game's being played in college, because the rules are a lot different in college compared to the way the pros are. But I mean, Europe's probably a little bit different from the NBA too in terms of their rules. So yeah, I don't know what exactly. I don't know if it's the AAU kind of deal. I don't know. It's just like it feels like players come in and it's like, well, they gotta work on their jump shot and they gotta work on this and they gotta work on this, and then by the time they're 23, 24, you're like, oh, okay, now we can see what this guy is. So, but yeah, you're right. The foreign-born. I mean, Luka comes in and just is really good immediately. Jokic actually took a while.
Right.
Same thing with Giannis. He actually took a little while. But a lot of these guys, they come right in, they're just really good. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's totally different, right? They're brought at a younger age. They're brought into the system. I think Luka Doncic moved to Spain when he was 13. Started playing professionally when he was 16. So it's a totally different way of doing it. And when they play professionally, it's not like, oh, we're going to play in this lower league. No, they play against men.
Yep.
So they play against grown-ups. So yeah, the systems are different. But I wanted to hear what was Jason Whitlock's latest conspiracy theory, because he probably does it better than anybody else.
Well, I mean, he basically he didn't like that, basketball's become a global game, and then that Stern took a bunch of money from the CCP, which, why the NBA is so big in China. And he's like, oh, it's just all about having a global game and all this stuff, and then he turned it into some conservative thing. Like, well, it's like we have open borders too, so it's just, that whole thing. Um, yeah, and then the guy he brought on, they were talking about it, and it's just like, well, the NBA now is soft. That's why Jokic is so good. And I'm like, dude, come on. Like, it's just, I'm sorry, I just don't have any patience for that because it's not just a take. It's not just an opinion. It's objectively not true. Okay? It's like, oh, it was more physical. Yeah, it was more physical in the 80s because you could just punch people. Is that what you guys want to go back to? Like, I don't understand this. And then he was like, I don't think he would have been able to deal with all the big guys in the 90s. Like, and then he mentioned a few, classic, big guys that you would normally think of. And then he's like, yeah, I mean, Antonio McDyess. I don't think they would have been able to deal with him. And I'm just like, what's next? You're going to say he wouldn't have been able to play against Marcus Camby? Like, what the fuck? What are we talking about here? I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah, Jokic is way bigger than both those guys. It's not even a question. He's significantly bigger.
It's like, oh, it doesn't work. It doesn't. Did you watch Hakeem Olajuwon? I did. Like, Jokic has those kind of moves. Like, that doesn't work? Are you kidding me?
Yep. And Jokic has the advantage of he can actually shoot threes. So it's not only would Jokic be, by the way, Jokic be just as good in the 90s, he'd probably be better.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
they wouldn't have any idea how to guard him. So yeah,
I don't think like when Charles Oakley said, I don't think Giannis would have succeeded in the 90s. Are you fucking kidding me? If Giannis came out onto a basketball court in the 90s, everybody would stop and go, "What the fuck is that? How is he moving like that? How are we supposed to defend that?"
Well, think if you put the 2016 Warriors, if you just took them back to 1994 and just put them out in a game, the first quarter, the other team would be like, what the hell is this? These guys going to make 25-foot shots? Like, this is bizarre. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think, listen, there's one thing I've learned about watching sports, guys. Great is great in any era. It makes no difference. Okay? Like, you can't go, oh, well, he wouldn't have been this good back then. You can't do that. First of all, you got to measure guys against their own eras. But I'm sorry, Jokic would do the same stuff, if he played back then, and it would be. I think he'd be even more dominant. To be honest with you, like they could try to be physical with him all they want. He just take a hook shot over him, do a little, over the shoulder.
Physical with him when he's so big. Like what?
Right.
That's the other thing. I'm like, oh, you can just. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you can just push him around. Okay.
Right. No, he's big. By the way, he's bigger than Olajuwon. He's bigger than Patrick Ewing. He's way bigger than Charles Barkley. Right. He's bigger than Karl Malone. He's bigger than. Like, who are you guarding him with? They'd have the same problems that they have today. The best centers in the league can't guard him today. What makes you think they're going to guard him back then? So, yeah, it's insufferable. The guy wouldn't have been good in this era. It's just that whole thing is just it's absolute nonsense. And I'm glad that
I think that's going to be, when we do the Festivus episode, when we get to December, I think that's going to be one of my sports grievances. 90s NBA guy. Can we just stop? Are we done?
It's insufferable. And again, like trying to discredit Jokic and discredit the Nuggets. What are we doing?
Yeah.
Like,
I'm not saying the Nuggets are like the greatest team I've ever seen, but like, come on, they're really good. Like, that's all I'm saying. They're really good. Right. Like, what do you want me to... Well, I'm watching it. What do you want me to say? It's like with Tua. People are like, how can you not love Tua? I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm watching him play. I don't really... It's not that good. What do you want me to... I can't close my eyes and watch him. Like, what do you want me to do?
Yeah. Yeah. I understand people saying, oh, and then there's the crowd. Well, Jokic is boring, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I can't help you there if you don't...
Well, yeah. I mean, that's fine. Okay, whatever.
If you don't like basketball that much, I can't help you. I don't know what you want me to. I don't know what you want me to say. The other topic I wanted to bring up was that so Karl Anthony Towns was on Patrick Beverley's podcast, which Patrick Beverley having a podcast is just that's funny enough. But so he said a couple things. The first one, I kind of think he gets a little delusional. He says that, what he wants to be known when he's done, when he hangs it up, that, he was one of the guys that changed the game. That Karl Anthony Towns like, yeah, I changed the game, so he wants that to be his legacy. And, first of all, there's a couple of problems. Number one, if you're going to change the game, you have to be like really good, like greatest of the great good. And he's
Yeah.
not anywhere close to that. Like, no offense, dude, you're a really good player, but you aren't in the class of the greatest in the league right now, let
You're
alone
a
all time.
7-footer who can shoot threes. I've never seen that before. Like, I've seen that before
Right.
now. If this was, 20 years ago, then I'd be like, yeah, I don't think I've seen that before. But, I've seen that now. Like, what? I don't.
Right. Right. And then they brought up on the Dan Patrick show, well, wasn't Dirk Nowitzki like the guy who really changed the game where 7-footers shooting threes? And Dan Patrick goes, yeah, but but Nowitzki wasn't really a center. It's like, yeah, but neither is Karl Anthony Towns. They had to bring in a center because he can't play center. So it's just like, what are you doing? You're a really big power forward that can shoot threes because you're 7 feet tall. You get to shoot a set shot. You don't even have to jump. It's like, explain to me how you've changed the game. Like, I'm missing where that happened. Because it's like, man, it's a good thing that players get to get their voice out there and they can talk about stuff. But it's a bad thing that, they just get to say whatever they want and nobody calls them on anything that they say. The other ridiculous thing was he said that, when Minnesota made the play-in or won the play-in game, not this season, but the last season, they beat the Clippers in the play-in to get into the playoffs. And he was saying, "Oh man, that was more impressive." All right, guys. Yeah, we had to cut that one a little bit short, but I promise I'll address Karl Anthony Towns' lunacy in the next episode. But anyway, so we'll see what happens with all this NBA stuff till we got free agency coming up, so that should be fun. And we'll try to get back on here next weekend.
All right.